that's it. I can take it over from here.
God.
Welcome to Intervision FM. I want to get my announcer in here, and then we'll get everything kicked off here. Mr. Brown, could you come back from beyond and introduce the show?
Is it running now? Yeah. Hi, everybody. This is the Godfather Soul, James Brown. I tell you, this business is on. My man is on. Check him out. This is the Godfather Soul, James Brown, saying stay with it and hit it. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, on today's show, we're going to have a fantastic show. We're going to have a gentleman named Orville Springs that I've known over the years and talked to him, and just has like a wide knowledge of like America, Colorado, Denver, and just different topics. And he told me a story about something that happened to his family a long time ago, and it's just now recently in the last few years coming to light. And we want to let you hear that story about his uncle, Orville, his uncle Walter Springs. And he's going to tell you the story, and we'll just sit back and listen to it, absorb it. Then we're going to get into a conversation, my co-host Alan, Orville, and I, and anyone else who wants to join in. Don't forget to share, subscribe, like these pages. Don't forget my book, 6 Shades of Blindness, is coming out on the 7th. So go get a pre-order, do a review as well. Go to our website, intervisionrecords.org. Please donate and support our show. It doesn't take much, $5, $10, and that really helps out our show. So let's get this kicking, and we'll be back right after Orville tells you more about his uncle.
Intervision, taking you to a new level of Christian radio. www.intervisionrecords.org, the official website of Intervision.
Send us feedback, requests.
Help spread the word about local musicians. We are Inter FM. Isn't it fun to sing along to the radio? If you could help someone else have that same experience and take it to the next level, maybe you would consider donating an old car, RV, truck, or boat. You know, for over 15 years, Intervision has been helping the physically challenged and grassroots artists to create their music. Using music to heal the world is Intervision's gift to you, and you can help them to continue by donating your unwanted car, RV, truck, or boat. You'll also receive a tax deduction at the end of the year. Call us 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 1-855-500-7433. That's 1-855-500-7433. Charity ID 4015. Your unwanted car, RV, truck, or boat is tax deductible, and it can make a difference right here in Colorado. The artists at Intervision thank you for your support. Make that call toll-free using Intervision's charity ID 4015. Again, the phone number 1-855-500-7433.
This is Orville Springs reading from Regis University, Regis Magazine, The Sacrifice of Walter Springs, written by Karen Augie, 20 November 2020. He was inspired to change a world burdened by racism. Now Regis honors his legacy. In 1941, it would have been hard to find anyone on the Regis College campus who didn't admire Walter Springs. Known for his kindness and sense of humor, Springs also was one of the state's top boxers. At 5'7", 160 pounds, he excelled as a starting fullback. Regis still had a football team then. Inspired by the teachings of his Jesuit professors, he converted to Catholicism, was baptized on campus, and was known to lead teammates in prayer before a game. And in his junior year, his classmates voted Springs the only black man among the 200 young men enrolled at Regis' most popular student. He did all that while working 2 jobs to pay for his education. Just a few months later, Springs left college to serve his country in a segregated army. Like many young men who left home to fight in World War II, he never came back. But Walter Springs didn't die on a foreign battlefield. He never made it out of the country. Just after midnight on December 17, 1942, Sergeant Walter Springs was shot and killed by a white military police officer in a Bastrop, Texas cafe, a few miles from the Army base where he was about to report for officer training. At least one news account noted that the mortally wounded soldier lived only long enough to receive last rites. Beyond that, there is little agreement about what exactly happened the night that left Walter Springs bleeding to death on a diner floor. Now, 78 years later, his family is still waiting to learn what happened and why, and whether there was ever justice for him. In this moment, when the country is confronting the persistence of racial injustice, both past and present, the Springs family asks that the sacrifice of a young black man who volunteered to fight for his country not be forgotten. Next spring, Regis University's renowned Center for the Study of War Experience will help make sure Springs' story is remembered. His life and his death are the inspiration for a new course, Stories from Wartime, Histories of African American Citizenship and Service. From faith and football to service. Walter Springs grew up in Denver, one of 11 children born to William and Willie Mae Springs. His father came to Colorado to strike it rich, says William Springs, his grandson, and Walter's nephew, Orville Springs. He ran away from home at 15, Orville Springs said of his grandfather. He was involved in one of the largest gold strikes in Colorado. He worked for General William Jackson Palmer in Colorado Springs. By the time Walter was born in 1918, William and Willie Mae and their family had moved to Denver, and William had traded in his pickaxe and gold pan for a janitor's broom, and according to the Denver City Directory, to clean Pullman coaches and the offices of the Denver Post. Later, Orville Springs said, William Springs became a teamster, driving through Denver streets, making deliveries. In 1939, Walter Springs graduated from Manual High School and set about becoming the first in his family to earn a college degree. Even in 1940, when Regis tuition was $150 plus about $30 in fees, the salary of a janitor or truck driver would hardly have been enough to carry the cost of higher education. And by 1940, William Springs was retired. But Walter Springs was determined. He got a partial scholarship and a series of part-time jobs, and while he didn't live on Regis's campus, he made his mark there. In May 1941, the Denver Catholic Register reported, as a member of the college boxing team this winter, Walt Springs scored sensational victories over opponents from Colorado College and Wyoming University and was considered the ace of the Rangers squad. The publication also sang his gridiron and spiritual praises. Just before the Spearfish game, he led the entire squad in prayer before Our Lady's Grotto on the Regis campus. The result was that the inspired Rangers ran up the largest score in their modern football history. Springs' friend and mentor, Reverend Joseph P. Donnelly, S.J., a Regis history professor, later recalled that during a trip to an away game, a hotel manager objected to putting a black man up for the night. His teammates came to Springs' defense and were about to tear the place apart. Walter Springs stopped them. Months later, as the United States entered World War II, Springs volunteered to join the Army. He was sent to Fort McClellan in Anniston, Alabama, where he became one of what would ultimately be 500,000 men trained there to fight the Axis powers. By the time his training ended, Springs had been promoted to technical sergeant and recommended for officer training with the Army Air Corps at Camp Swift, Texas. In December 1942, Walter Springs came home on furlough and saw his family for what would be the last time. At home, he met his new nephew, Orville, and a family member took a snapshot of the young man standing military straight and looking proud in front of Bill's Diner on Welton Street, which Orville Springs said a family member owned. Then Walter Springs left Denver on the train headed to Camp Swift. He never got there. A fight on two fronts. Camp Swift lived up to its name. In the months after the December 7th, 1941, Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the nation united behind leaders who galvanized human, industrial, and military resources into action to fight a common enemy, German and Japanese forces. U.S. bases popped up like dandelions, primarily across the South and West, where military leaders figured mild climate would lend itself to year-round training. One of those bases was Camp Swift near Bastrop, Texas, a farming community about 30 miles outside Austin. On Christmas Eve, 1941, LBJ, who was serving in the Navy, called the town to let them know that Bastrop had been selected as the site of an Army installation, said Lieutenant Colonel Philip A. Cost, now Camp Swift's officer in charge, and a self-described history buff. At the time, future President Lyndon Johnson was a Texas congressman. He had been in the Navy Reserve, but was called into active duty after the attack on Pearl Harbor. In January and February, contracts were let, and by May 4th, 1942, they had the official flag raising, Cost said. In 4 months, they basically built an entire city on some 50,000 acres. By war's end, 100,000 soldiers had come through Camp Swift. A fair number of those soldiers were black, enough that separate facilities, barracks, a mess hall, training grounds, even a canteen for socializing were built for blacks and whites. Like many of the more than 1 million young black men who served in World War II, Walter Springs likely hoped that serving his country would not only demonstrate patriotism, but prove that blacks were capable of serving honorably and deserved respect and equality. He told me that he wanted to get into this war, where he hoped that he would aid in the elimination of race prejudice, Donnelly wrote in an article that first appeared in the Interracial Review, a publication of the National Catholic Federation for the Promotion of Better Race Relations. A version of the article appeared in the Regis Roundup campus publication in 1952 with the announcement of a scholarship in Springs' memory. Springs wasn't the only one harboring that hope. The Pittsburgh Courier, a leading black newspaper at the time, is widely credited with launching the Double V, or Double Victory campaign, urging black Americans to link the fight against fascism overseas to the fight against racism at home. In a February 14, 1942 article, Courier editors wrote, "We as colored Americans are determined to protect our country. Therefore, we have adopted the Double V war cry, victory, over our enemies at home and victory over our enemies on the battlefields abroad. Thus, in our fight for freedom, we wage a two-pronged attack against our enslavers at home and those abroad who would enslave us. We have a stake in this fight. We are Americans too. But like many black soldiers from the West and the North, Springs may not have been prepared for the blatant racism and open hostility of the Jim Crow South, where many reported for training. Springs apparently experienced that in Alabama. In his interracial review article, Donnelly wrote that Springs came to visit him while he was home on furlough that December. We had a long talk while he was home. I found him no longer witty and sunny. He was worried. Incidents had happened, none too pleasant. He tried to avoid difficulties by keeping to camp and out of the way of whites. He hoped that nothing serious would happen, but it did, and Walter was the victim. Fatal confrontation. On December 17th, Walter Springs was on a train headed to his new assignment at Camp Swift. In the Bastrop newspaper that day, a front-page story brought news of the sinking of a Japanese ship. Closer to home, a Dallas judge reportedly was considering allowing women to serve on juries because the war had drained the pool of male jurors. The paper was full of news of local holiday gatherings. A local market offered a steak at 39 cents a pound. A 7-foot Christmas tree cost $1.05. When Springs got off the train in Bastrop, he apparently didn't head straight for Camp Swift, but stopped in town at Jackson's Cafe, which news accounts called a Negro Cafe. Some reports say the trouble started when military police entered the cafe and demanded soldiers line up for inspection, and Springs resisted. The military police officer, who later was charged with manslaughter, claimed he shot Springs because he came at him with a knife. Nephew Orville Springs noted that the MP accused of shooting his uncle was a corporal, while Walter Springs was a sergeant. Maybe he didn't like being outranked by a black man, Orville Springs suggested. News accounts uniformly stated that Walter Springs was shot in the back. Whether that MP was convicted or even tried, not even Walter Springs' family knows, Orville Springs said. Rose Campbell, Associate Director of the Regis Center for the Study of War Experience, hopes the U.S. military and the National Archives will provide answers about the outcome of the case in time for the upcoming spring semester course that will include Walter Springs. 2 days before Christmas, 1942, soldiers bore a flag-draped coffin holding the body of Technical Sergeant Walter V. Springs into a chapel where his father, brothers, and sisters joined numerous classmates, instructors, and Regis president to say goodbye to the first Regis student to die in World War II. In his article written the day of the funeral, Donnelly didn't come out and say exactly that he couldn't reconcile the MP's account of Springs' coming at him with a knife with the young man he knew, but he made his feelings clear. I taught him that Catholic principles, if honestly lived, would solve the problems which faced the world in which he would live. Well, Walter lived those principles. Maybe he was a martyr to them. The following fall, William Springs requested and received a veteran's headstone from the War Department. It now stands over Walter Springs' grave in Denver's Riverside Cemetery, where more than 1,000 veterans rest today. Inscribed on the tombstone are the words, his life an ideal, his memory an inspiration. Beyond bloodshed, beyond the battlefield. Whatever happened to Walter Springs, the death of a black man on U.S. soil was not an isolated incident. If the concept of equality for blacks was unthinkable to many, the idea that a black man could be worthy of respect was frightening. It upended the racist notions of white superiority that were the foundation of racial repression and segregation, said Lauren Hirschberg, PhD, assistant professor of history at Regis. Racial tensions erupted in violence around several military installations. Among the most notorious and controversial, the Lee Street riot occurred in Alexandria, Louisiana in 1942 on a Saturday night. A white military police officer either arrested or attacked a black soldier from nearby Camp Claiborne. Military and state police reported that a riot broke out and officers used force to stop it, injuring several dozen black soldiers. Blacks who were present, however, stated that police opened fire on the crowd. Today, it's widely believed that between 20 and 300 black soldiers and civilians were killed. In October 2020, a University of Southern Mississippi professor convened a discussion to explore whether a mass grave of Lee Street riot victims exists. At the war's end, many black soldiers returned from foreign battlefields to violence at home. One of the trends then was white supremacists seeing African-American servicemen coming home, seeing them in uniform, and the sort of threat that seemed to pose to them would result in race riots and violence, Hirschberg said. Violence is exactly what Isaac Woodard experienced before he ever made it home from fighting in the Pacific. On February 12, 1946, Woodard and several other soldiers, black and white, boarded a bus to take them home from Camp Gordon in Georgia, where they had received an honorable discharge. Along the way, Woodard and the white bus driver clashed over a bathroom stop. When the bus next stopped, Batesburg, South Carolina, police boarded, forcibly removed Woodard, who was in his Army uniform, arrested him for drunken and disorderly conduct, and beat him so savagely that he was left permanently blind. Word of such incidents reached the desk of President Harry Truman, who reportedly told a friend that his stomach turned upon hearing about them. The case and others like it marked a turning point in the military's treatment of minorities. Truman's outrage prompted him to establish the first Presidential Commission on Civil Rights, and his Justice Department filed federal criminal charges against the Batesburg Police Chief, Linwood Shull. An all-white jury acquitted Shull, but the case illuminated for the presiding judge the issues around civil rights. That judge went on to dissent in a case that upheld school segregation, and his dissenting opinion became the basis for the U.S. Supreme Court's majority ruling in the landmark Brown versus Board of Education, which made racial segregation of schools illegal. Then in 1948, Truman issued the executive order desegregating the U.S. Armed Forces. For their service in World War II, 7 black men were awarded the Medal of Honor, 52 years after the war ended. Only one, Vernon Baker, was still alive in 1997 to receive the nation's highest tribute. According to press accounts at the time, tears streamed down Baker's face as President Bill Clinton hung the medal around his neck a half-century after he single-handedly destroyed 2 German machine gun nests. Also at the ceremony was Captain David Williams, the white commander of the now famed A Company 761st Tank Battalion. Williams fought through numerous Army denials for Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers to receive the Medal of Honor. Rivers was killed in combat November 19, 1944. Williams told the American Forces press services at the time that fighting to get Rivers the recognition he deserved was one of the toughest battles he'd ever waged. With the Germans, I knew my enemy, he said, but racism is a hard enemy to defeat. A voice for reconciliation. Defeating racism, or at least firing a few salvos in the war against it, was the goal of the Walter Springs Memorial Scholarship. By 1952, Don Christopher had graduated from Regis, married and was living in Casper, Wyoming with his wife and daughter, and working for the Continental Oil Company. The United States was basking in the pride of victory and the promise of unparalleled prosperity. Christopher could have simply gone on with his life. Instead, he decided to honor his former teammates. So he sent a check for $50 to Regis with a letter that read, in part, "The enclosed is donated to Regis to honor Walter Springs, a classmate of mine and a boy I much admired for his sportsmanship and spirit of fair play. Walt loved Regis and all that it stands for, and few of us really knew or realized the great sacrifices he made." Christopher and the classmates who joined in the effort envisioned 2 annual scholarships, one for a black student, one for a white. In those pre-civil rights era days, a scholarship promoting racial harmony was a novel enough idea that it made national news. It also won support from a number of celebrities of the day. Louis Armstrong dropped by Regis with a donation to the fund during a visit to Denver. So did actor Pat O'Brien, best known for playing the title football hero in Newt Rockney, All-American, and a pal of then Regis President Reverend Raphael C. McCarthy, S.J. In 1953, New York Giants Hank Thompson, Monty Irvin, and Don Mueller pledged $1 for every home run they hit that season, netting the scholarship a cool $91. Irvin heard about the scholarship while recuperating in Denver after breaking his ankle. Before heading back to the Polo Grounds, he presented Regis with one of his high-top shoes filled with 93 silver dollars. No record could be located in the Regis archives showing what became of the scholarship effort, or that any money was ever dispersed in Springs' name. But Walter Springs' name is listed alongside all the Regis students who died serving their country in World War II on a plaque that hangs in Main Hall. Orville Springs earned the college degree his uncle didn't get to finish, then earned a master's in journalism at Columbia University. After a writing career for the San Francisco Examiner, he is back in his hometown of Denver, surrounded by his son and grandson. Springs' cousins, nieces, and nephews, and family photos dating back nearly to the time William Springs came to Colorado hunting for gold. He is grateful that at Regis, his Uncle Walter's life once again will serve as an inspiration. The experience of Walter Springs and other Black Americans in the military is the subject of the newest addition to Regis's Stories from Wartime curriculum. The upcoming spring semester will feature stories from wartime histories of African American citizenship and service. To learn more about the class, visit Regis EDU War Experience.
My name is Brother D'Angelo Travis, and you listen to InnerVision FM.
Christian Brothers Moving Company takes care of you by taking care of your family's moving needs. Give them a call, 303-526-2630, and tell them that you heard about them on InnerVision. Get the best moving experience you've ever had with Christian Brothers Moving Company. 303-526-2630. That's 303-526-2630. Christian Brothers is a proud underwriter of InnerVision. Call them now, 303-526-2630.
And we welcome you back to InnerVision FM TV. that was quite a true story that you just heard read by Mr. Springs about his uncle and other relatives, and just a history lesson. One of which is like a steak dinner costing 39 cents, Tristram Street back then costing $1, and during the Pearl Harbor time where all the stuff was going on, and then to have this conflict happening on American soil, where we said land of the brave, land of the free, and it took us a long time to live up to those words, if in fact we are living up to those words this very day, as freedom of speech and freedom of thought has been attacked on many levels. So, Mr. Springs, is your mic unmuted? Let's see. And Alan, are you unmuted?
I am now unmuted.
Okay. And Mr. Springs, where are you?
You'll probably want to find.
Okay. Let me see.
There's an unmute all button.
Okay, so Mr. Springs.
Yes.
Okay, there you are.
Oh,
Okay. Yeah. Very in-depth reading and understanding of what was going on at that time. And if you just joined us, this is Innovision FM. My name is Johnny J. We've been doing these shows, different variety of shows, topics that I'm interested in, and hopefully the topics that you're interested in as well. You can give topics, send it, put it in our inbox, and we'll respond as time allows. So, Springs, I think you told me that you didn't know about this until like much later in your life. How did you become aware of your uncle Walter Springs?
Well, I've always known because the pictures were there. We always had family albums. My grandmother had albums. And so I always saw that picture of him holding me, but I didn't, and I knew somewhat of the circumstances of his death.
Okay. And so because I read the book about Sammy Davis Jr. and what he went through. And so he's famous. So we found out many of his stories of people that were famous, and the Sikh airmen. We found out their story, and how Miss Roosevelt she got that I guess certified by flying in one of the flights with them, and then that really took off. Are these stories just stories that, unless you're famous, unless you're a prominent, are pretty much hidden in our history? Do you think, Mr. Orville?
Well, the family, the Springs family were pioneers in Colorado. And so they were well known, and the community was very upset when they discovered that Walter had been killed. And I even heard stories that they let the lions out of the cages in the zoo, and people rioted for days over his death.
Wow. Well,
and I have a lady friend. Well, at that time, she was married to a veteran, and she had an old newspaper that she let me borrow. And I just wasn't thinking to make a photocopy, but I found it, in that paper.
Wow.
Yeah, like the Rocky Mountain or the Denver Post.
Those copies are on record. If one were to find them via the library, the Denver Public Library, just head on down there. They're probably
Right.
on Fish or something like that at this point. They may or may not be digitally, what do you call that? They may
Reproduce.
not be digitally stored, but there is a project in place wherein everything is getting digitally reproduced and stored, so that all the old microfiche stuff is also preserved. I really do hope that Regis University is able to
Bring that
Locate
forth.
those.
Yeah.
exactly, because you see, Regis University, if you work for them, you say you
No,
used to
I
work.
don't.
He went to
You-
he
you
went, he
were-
went to school. He went to school there.
Oh, I see.
No,
But,
I didn't go to school there.
Oh, okay. I thought you were one of the graduates. Okay. Your
No,
uncle
I
was
went to CU in Boulder.
okay. Your uncle
Majored
was
in
Okay,
international
that's
relations.
journalism.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So
I
I'm
did my
thinking,
graduate work in journalism.
I
Ah,
see. So I'm thinking your journalism background could really do well to allow for you to get the access to those old records if they even exist.
Hmm.
They do not exist, or
Well, the dates are available, now. I mean,
I-
I think that Regis has archives, and a lot of the information that came out for this story for the Regis magazine came from their archives.
wow.
and I thought it was fascinating that this fund was set up in your uncle's name and to be dispersed, and it never got dispersed. So people were donating into this fund, and the money just disappeared. Which have they ever answered about how that could have happened? What was their excuse for that misplacement of money in funds?
I don't know.
Well, for people, if anybody's watching this who might be from that school, you might go and ask, what's going on here? Because it seemed like this is a honorable man, and his untimely death was something that should have been recognized by the university, that he went there to fight for his country and didn't even get a chance to do that before being cut down at this cafeteria.
Hmm.
And then there was something else you mentioned in there, that over like 300 people were massacred. And it reminded me of what happened in Oklahoma in when it's called Black Wall Street. Was that ever reported other than the information that you had about that massacre?
I'm familiar with the story, but I don't know much about it.
Yeah, that was just
Yeah.
like the Black Wall Street massacre. I mean,
Right.
I didn't know about that until I was in my 50s.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking like, I know schools can't teach you everything, but and because the community of people, if you don't, I guess, if people don't share stories, maybe one group of people knows about the story and they share it amongst each other, but it doesn't get around to the whole community. I think at that time in America, we were 10%. So
Right.
we have a lack of, I guess, really, passing down these stories. So where the history books may not write about it, we can write about it and preserve a lot of this history of what America said it was, and then what America really was during these times.
That brings up a very interesting point, because Johnny, history is written by not only those who lived through it, and not only those who perceive how things are within a certain societal demographic, but history is also written by those who eventually are going to go ahead and teach it. And sometimes the views of what may have been perceived to have happened differ from the educational standpoint of what may have happened. Sometimes one gets into a real sticky situation wherein perhaps what historically happened as remembered by and chronicled by those who lived through it is not often, I shouldn't say it like that. Sometimes it can be that the educational institutions at hand do not teach the entirety of what may have transpired.
And you know, I'm thinking like, you know, they have this, I was listening, well, they had this Black History Month. There's so many things that are left out. And I don't know why it should be only 1 month, because our American experience is so vast that I'm just wondering, like, you know, besides them teaching the propaganda or whatever they're doing in school, all this craziness, that this could be installed into many schools. So we just have an understanding of who we are. Because my wife, she was from Moscow, and she says that she read stories about things. I think it was a lady named Maya Angelou. She was in prison or something like that. And they wrote letters to get her. I don't know if it was her. I can't remember the lady. And they were writing letters to say, free this lady from prison. I'm thinking, in other countries, they know about what's happening here, but we at that time had limited information about what's happening here because we didn't have control of the news media. And so I was just thinking to myself, I know Mr. Johnson, he had a television station, the BET network, and then he sold it. Do you think, and I know there's been many, you know, African Americans, Black Americans, newspapers. Do you think that we have slowed down in producing such outlets like this, or do you think that is there so much stuff around out there that we're getting lost as far as like in the chatter about this history, if you understand what I'm saying?
Well, I think so many different points of view, and they cater to their own base. And so there's nothing like Ebony magazine no longer exists, which was very popular magazine in its day. Jet magazine, John Johnson, you know, the Negro Digest, those kinds of publications, I think were very educational, and they were wide read, and they survived since the early 40s. I think the first issue of Ebony came out in 1942.
Yeah, and I'm thinking you've heard of a gentleman. He was a comedian named Byron Allen, and I believe he's bought up a lot of cable channels, and I guess Puff Daddy has a channel, and I forgot who else got together and got to get a channel. But a lot of these channels, if you have cable, you have to go to if you're paying $200 right now, you have to go to the sometimes $250 to $300 level in order to get access to these other channels, which once again makes it not accessible to the. I think they said there's 40% of the Black community that watches and pays into this medium, and a lot of them don't have access to that, to those different channels that would bring out history lessons like this. And I really appreciate you sharing this true story of American history with us.
This is the first time I've been on the radio, and I was fascinated just to hear it. And I'm very happy for the opportunity to be on your show. And I think I will be listening in the future.
well, appreciate it. And we have different topics, and we give people a chance to chime in and disagree to agree, you know, because we like like very fervent conversation, and we want to hear different people's opinions, whether we agree with them or not. We want to be that vessel of exchange of ideas. So tell us a little bit about your journey, because you've had a very interesting journey through life. Tell us about your time in the 60s and in San Francisco, because that was an interesting story.
Well, you know, I worked for Pan Am. When I first left Denver, I got a job with the airlines.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to travel, which was one of my great things that I wanted to do in life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to go to Europe and Africa, Caribbean. Had a great time, took my son there, and my mother went with us on one particular trip.
Mm-hmm.
Then I ended up working for the newspaper, and that was an interesting experience. It just didn't pan out as a career goal. By the time I was ready to go to the newspaper, I was already like 29 years old, and I wasn't really academically inclined at that age. When I was younger, I was more academically inclined. But at one point, I decided to run for president, and I called press conferences around the country. Recently, my nephew and his son, Slick Rick, you may have heard of Slick Rick Springs.
Yeah.
That's my nephew.
Hmm.
That's my brother's son. And they had discussed my running for president. And so they Googled it, and they found some pictures of me from a press conference that I had in New Orleans at the press club, and photos that were being sold on eBay.
What year was this?
That was 1972.
Now, I understand that Dick Gregory also ran for president, and he said that it was showing that he was winning, and then all of a sudden it flipped. I mean, did you hear that story as well? Did you know, was aware of that?
I knew that he ran for president, and in fact, Shirley Chisholm ran for president at that time, but I never got on the ticket.
Oh, okay.
I never got on the ticket.
Well, hey, you know, I tell you what, sir, I do want to thank you for, you know, really just taking that bull by the horns, following that dream, whether or not you succeeded, my friend, you ran.
Yes.
You made the attempt.
Yeah. And in a day, I guess back in those days, it wasn't as it was expensive because you had to get your name out there, but it wasn't as expensive as it's starting to get, where you had to almost be a billionaire or millionaire.
Super PACs and everything else.
Crazy. So during that time, how did you even get the concept, of going to that level?
Well, having been a reporter, I knew that game. So I knew about calling press conferences. As a matter of fact, when I was in San Francisco, I was on the City Hall beat, and I was on the mayor's beat. I was on the police beat. I had several different beats. So I would hear your story. The problem for me, I got so involved because I believed in the power of the press, and I would get so involved, and they would tell me, well, that's no longer a story. It's a story as long as the person is still homeless. But once you find housing for that homeless person, it's not a story. And I would get too involved and try to find solutions for the problems.
Wow. Did you ever meet a news reporter at the time? I think his name was Ken Hamlin.
I remember him, yes.
So did you guys cross paths because he was
No, I used to listen to his show. In fact, I came out to, I wasn't on the air, but I went to the studio. He used to be like in West Alameda. Remember he had a studio out in West Alameda?
Yeah. Okay. So he left, like KVO, and then he had it.
I remember when he had the studio out there, and there was a lady I knew a few people that were on-air personalities.
Now, and definitely, people always say, because I've been to Europe, and a lot of my friends have not. I've even had friends when I first started going to Europe, like 8 years ago, different places in Europe. They said, be careful, almost like saying, be afraid. When you started going out to the places in Europe, tell us a little bit of like the nuance that you found that was different from America when you went to these other countries. So give people who don't really travel and they just look at pictures at the nuance.
Well, for example, when I lived in San Francisco, I lived in the Haight-Ashbury, 1967.
Wow.
No, was it 67? Yeah, something like that. The Summer of Love, 67.
Yeah.
I lived in the Haight-Ashbury, and there's a lot of boutiques, and I happened to be passing by a boutique that was near my house, and I saw all these very exotic looking people. And they were, so I wasn't really looking for anything to shop for, but I decided to go in to find out who these people were. And they were from a dance company called Brasiliana 69. So it must have been 69, Brasiliana 69. And so I got acquainted with them, and I had a friend who had just opened a restaurant on Market Street, and I invited the troupe to come to the restaurant for their grand opening. And they invited me to come to Rome. When you're in Rome, look us up. And I got their contact information, and I went to them. It was an old Roman villa, I guess you would call it, and knocked on the door, and they said, come in.
Okay.
But what I discovered there is a lot of people, because they weren't able to work, they were very poor. In fact, they were too poor to come back to the United States. And that was a big shock to me, to find out that they were in this kind of dire straits. They were too poor to come back home. Yeah.
I also know, okay, like I've been.
These were expatriates.
Oh, yeah.
These were expatriates.
Individuals who were displaced from their home native country and kind of got themselves a little bit stranded. Oh man.
Now you said, I think you told me even to parts of Africa. How is that different than when you go to like a heavily condensed area of New York that's Black, or to LA? What is it like going to a place that 90% of the people are of African descendants? What was that like?
Well, okay, I went to a club. I spent the day, sightseeing with my family. Then in the evening, I was single at the time, and I would go to a local club. And the club atmosphere was very similar to a club here in the States. Fights would break out across the room, things like that. But then you could be identified as an American, and they were willing to help you, find your way around. I got caught in the rain. I was with the family one day, and we got caught in the rain, and we had a guide. He had just sort of attached himself to us. We went to the hotel, and when we got back up the next morning, he was waiting for us. He waited through the rain to be with us the next day.
Wow.
And then he took us to some popular spots. This was also during the war with Biafra in Nigeria. And when we would be all together, and then he would disappear in the crowd. Then he would reappear. And the reason he disappeared is because he saw somebody who was from the other tribe, for his own safety. And at this particular spot, I will remember, you remember Whitney Young, who was the head of the National Urban League? In fact, his daughter had a show recently. I think it's still going on at the Denver Art Museum. His granddaughter, she's doing really well with her art. But he died at this particular spot. They practice a lot of, I would call it voodoo, or worship the nature gods. And there were a lot of people that would go to this particular spot to worship the sea gods, I guess you might say. And this is where Whitney Young died. That we never felt threatened in that spot, but later that's where he actually died.
Was it a malaria or?
I don't know what the cause of death was. I don't know. It could have been drowning, for all I know. It could have been drowning.
Wow.
It is interesting that that you do bring up the practice of the occult, or perhaps something to do with that kind of hastened that poor individual's demise. That's a for sure gig.
Right.
Now, also what I noticed, because when I was in Moscow, we had some college students, and I went to some different churches in Russia where it was a mixture of people, and I know like the African people, they know 5 languages to our 1.5 language. And I thought that was interesting that was encouraged to know all these languages, but here in the United States, our scores are so bad that we can barely get past our first language, which is the American language. Did you see that dichotomy between the ones that were able to get education there and then the ones here who?
We only went to one French-speaking country, and that was Rabat, Morocco. We went to Rabat, but all the other countries that we went to in West Africa were English-speaking countries because of the language difficulty. In fact, I was with my stepmother and my son at this one particular hotel, Rabat Tour Hassan. And, like there was like a 12-course meal, and my French wasn't that great, and my Arabic was non-existent. And so my stepmother didn't know what was on the menu. And so she said, well, I'll just have some beer. And she proceeded to get drunk. And then she tells me I'm a bad son.
Okay.
Hurt my feelings. I run out of the restaurant, and I'm in this beautiful paradise, crying my eyes out. It was crazy. It was crazy.
Oh wow!
And she apologized, and and we can. She said, "Well, if I'm running your trip, I'll just go on back to the States." But the next flight wasn't for 3 days.
Now that's
so she wasn't going to stay there by herself, not speaking the language.
See,
plus, she had the money and I didn't.
That's awesome.
Oh man! Well, I want to let the audience, if you just joined us, we're listening to Mr. Orville Spring and Alan. Of course, Alan Cofield is my co-host. I'm Johnny J, and this is Intervision FM TV. And I just want to bring you like different shows from time to time. And Mr. Springs told us a true life story of his uncle who was going to World War II, but got circumvented from going there unjustly, and how that history is being raised back up at Regis College, and that part of history will not fade off into the distance, never to be heard or known about. And so I hope that you share this with many of your friends, people that live here in Colorado and people that live in other places, since this show goes throughout the world, to understand what the times were like during those days, and step by step. And then I had Mr. Springs give us a little idea. And we have, and I'm honored to have someone who actually ran for president.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And so
I guess you could, well, no, I'm not going to even touch that one.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say Mr. President-elect to you. Sorry. Not even going to touch that one. Sorry. Oh, I touched it, didn't I? I touched it. Sorry.
But so we appreciate everybody come in. Share this, like it. Mr. String, is it? I know you have a group. Is there any way you would like have people to correspond with you, or to find out more about your uncle, what would you have to lead the audience with tonight?
Well, I'm on Facebook under Orville Springs. You could send me a friend request on Facebook, Orville Springs.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
All right. And also go to innovationrecords.org to find out more about our nonprofit. That's innovationrecords.org to find out more about our nonprofit. innovationfm.com. You can also go to that to find out more about our radio station. 6 Shades of Blindness is our book that will be out on the 7th. We have a special show. Tomorrow is going to be our special Thanksgiving show, and we're going to pick out who are the turkeys of 2020, right? So if you have people or
You got
things,
any opinions? Go ahead and call them in. We'll entertain them. Go ahead and give some comments, anything like that. We got some turkeys lists all drawn up, so we're going to have some fun.
yeah. So we definitely want you to let us know about that, and well, that's it. We'll see you the next time here on Innovation FM, and that will be tomorrow. So God bless, and talk to you soon.
Thanks, Johnny.